Welcome to Bad Bosses, Great Leaders, the podcast exploring what it takes to lead with purpose. And today I am joined by Cale Corbett. Cale is an accomplished program management leader experienced in driving operational excellence and cross-functional collaboration. He's led transformative initiatives at companies like General Motors and Dell Technologies, generating $26 million in revenue, $100 million in cost savings, and improving team productivity by 25%. He's a former USAF veteran, and Cale's leadership role is rooted in accountability, continuous improvement, and data-driven strategy. Known for empowering teams and fostering agile practices, he is passionate about mentoring future leaders and aligning business outcomes with impactful results. Cale, welcome.
Yes, thank you.
I'm so excited to have you join me, especially excited to chat today because while we've not worked together in business, in life, we have
Right.
collaborated as participants in an agile course. And I've seen your team building skills in practice as you sort of effortlessly collaborated with us and drew the team together. You're a great participant in sharing your insight and feedback. But what really impressed me were those team building skills and really gathering all of us together for the purpose of working together in an agile environment, really, truly an agile environment. So tell me, how did you get to that point where you could rally people around you so effortlessly?
Well, let me first say thank you for all that kind recognition. Uh, the question about how do I get folks to rally around me? Don't laugh, but it takes practice, and I suspect you already knew that was part of the answer. It's years. It's years in the making. It's begging and borrowing and stealing from other people whose styles and approaches that have resonated with me. That's the short answer. And then after a certain amount of time, you find out when you're in a room like we were together virtually, you find out what works, you find out who your participants are, and you're guiding and you're in real time molding and shaping. That's the short answer.
That's a great answer. I like the idea of molding and shaping because I think that also speaks to agile in that we have to be flexible with the talent and the resources that we have and work with it to aim for the outcome that we have set for us. So I love that answer. I think that's great. Tell me, when it comes to teams, you sometimes are dealt a hand that you don't expect, or perhaps you are in charge of a team and relaying goals and objectives from top down. And I know in Agile, we want the top down and the bottom up approach so that we're all coming together at the center to work towards whatever those outcomes are. However, sometimes it is that bottom down approach where you have to align a team with the goals and objectives. And how do you do that? Because that can be a really challenging thing to try and accomplish. So where do you start? Where do you begin?
Oh, great question. And no matter what you do or say, it is challenging to your point, Rebecca. And I think that's really key. We can't dodge the challenge with any particular tip or trick. You have to bull your way through the challenge on occasion. But the answer is twofold, really. The first one is you're usually not put in a situation like you described without some forewarning, without some ability to prep. And so one of the first things that you've been doing that entire time is you've been building relationship and you've been building common ground and common drivers, if you will, with that team of men and women you were talking about. If you wait until you're handed the strategic objectives by your boss and asked to go drive these, it's too late. At that point, there's no molding, there's no shaping, there's just scrambling and there's relying on charisma or luck at that point. So prep to me is the first half of that. And then the second I alluded to just now, which is look for common ground, look for common drivers. Each of these objectives, whether we get them from on high or we're working on objectives that we've decomposed for ourselves from like that bottom up mix that you were talking about, those objectives are something we should all be unified on by default to one extent or the other. And if not, that means we've not done our homework at the front end of the process, or we don't have, quote, what I call good leadership that has it helped us understand that we should be aligned by now. All right. So prepare ahead, build on common drivers, build on common goals and objectives at the human level. And that's how I do it. And it's not always easy.
Well, I think you said it earlier that it takes practice, right? So what has your career trajectory been that has given you that practice and ability to have the bigger picture while working alongside people?
Oh man, I meant to send you 20 virtual dollars on some kind of cash app later for that question. All the veteran folks out there who might hear this later will appreciate this. It began it began in the military, for me at least. It began in the Air Force. Okay. The way it works in the military is they teach you, they tell you what they're going to teach you, they teach you, and then they tell you what they taught you, right? And we're familiar with that method in the industry as well. But repetition, practice, teaching, the ability to say, look, they take you, they train you, then they grab you and they throw you into the deep end of the pool and say, these men and women are yours, lead them. And you're like, ugh. The short answer, that's the very short early answer, which is you try by fire, okay, with training. And so over the last number of years that I'm not going to tell you how many, I've had a chance at each stop to build on that training, to build on, again, I told you before, build on the experiences and the styles and the inspirations, if you will, that the folks way back when in my military career gave me to forget. And if the conversation lends itself to it, I can tell you a few of those experiences. Each time I've changed my career, I've moved from, say, the military to consulting to leadership of one kind or the other. Each time it's just building an accretion of those experiences and those training ideas on top of each other. And sometimes, again, it's dumb luck. Let's just be honest. You're a leader as well. Sometimes it's just you get the right people, sometimes you get the wrong people. But it's just literally building a career year by year, learning from your very dumb mistakes. That if you're any kind of leader, you only repeat twice. Third time you have to take stock. So it's just a journey, really. And again, I think you would agree with that for the most part.
Absolutely. Tell me, I'd love to hear more about some of those stories. Do you have one in mind, particularly that was either one of those mistakes where you learned it once, twice, and then you're like, all
Three,
right, we took stock, we got
yeah,
it. Or did you
yeah.
have a moment where aha moment too, where it's like, this is okay. It's clicking now for me as a leader building teams with maybe the life jacket, maybe an oar when it comes to the training, but, really
Yeah.
trying to steer your own course.
Yeah, let's talk about let's one of the key mistakes, and I think the theme of our show here will help illustrate this. It took me a long time to learn the difference between good leader and good manager. And I still quote, that's the Air Force's fault, and it's not the Air Force's fault. That's one of my takeaways. They said, look, you are in charge, right? And when you're 20, 21 years old, in charge means something completely different than it does some years later when you've had some time under your belt and you know what really that means. So I was more managing than leading. I was using the stripes on my arm as my source of authority versus my actual leadership ability that they had been trying to hone in me. They know that you're going to do that. They know these young men and women are going to stumble, but I did. It's one of those things at the end of the day, if you've got people that you outrank in that structure, they have to do what you say. But it doesn't mean they have to do it gladly. They don't have to do it willingly. They don't have to even do it right now unless it calls for it. So there's all sorts of ways for them to sabotage your bad managing and your bad leadership, right? Sandbogging, we might call it. That one took a long time to differentiate between management and leadership. And that, I think that's what drew you and me together in that call that night in that training was we had those conversations with the instructor about the differences between leading and managing, especially in an agile context, right? So
Absolutely.
broadly speaking, that one was one that took me 3, 4, 5, 10 times to learn, you know.
Well, it's a lesson that does get repeated, I think, too, because we are met with different personalities, people of different backgrounds, and it's a privilege to be able to work with diversity. And you, as a leader, learn new things whenever you are met in those situations. But something you said to me, a leader uh, people have to follow you if you're a manager, right? If you have that promotion, but a leader is someone who has influence and impact. And it takes a while to get there. We're not, overnight, you have the title, you have the promotion. All right, you're a leader now. There's actually a lot of effort and work and learning and relearning to your point that goes into that.
Well, I was going to say that I think you probably had the same experience where you've been put in a position of leadership like that, and there was somebody on that team who thought that was her job to have to be had, and maybe it was. Maybe there was a contest, if you will, between your experience and hers, and you won, right? You got the promotion, you got the leadership position. It's now on you. She's already, if I could use the word here, she's quote your enemy at that point. You now have a person on your team who is fighting against your success for her own personal reasons. I'm speaking generically. So now that's, you have to go in very knowledgeable of who that person is and how you're going to, like you said earlier, how you're going to influence her and bring her along and show her that she's valuable and that you make her want to follow you, not make her follow you, right? Inspire her to follow you. Show her why you got the spot.
How do you approach someone like that, whether they're more seasoned, different, perhaps specialty, but still aiming for that higher level of authority and influence? How do you go about bringing them alongside of you?
If you're observant and you're watching, and if you're half the leader that you want to be at some point in the future, you're going to recognize that skill or that differentiator or that secret sauce that person has that put them in the place where they're contending with you for that position. If you're observant, you're going to see what they bring to the team. You're going to see a particular skill set or a driver. Again, I'll talk about drivers. I use that word all the time. There's something about that person or several somethings. Tap into it, build on it, ask them to keep bringing that to the table, right? Instead of saying, well, this is my box now, you're in this piece of that box. They still have contributions, and your job as a leader is to empower and leverage and bring the best of them out, right? That's the essence of leadership, I think. And so do not let the fact that you quote won color your judgment. That person still is just as valuable as she was 24 hours ago, maybe even more so, because now she can be an advocate and a force, a multiplier for you if you treat her with respect and recognize what she brings to the table.
I think we're definitely talking about the understanding that in any kind of team building situation, especially, but particularly agile, you want to have that servant leadership mentality. Is that something that you took from the military? Is that something you had to learn on your own working in business? Is that something that you've changed your thought process over the years on?
More the second and third, if you will, of the three. And I can't speak for the military training techniques of today, but in the 90s when I was coming up, if you will, I don't remember servant leadership being in our nomenclature. The most fancy thing we had in our nomenclature that was non-military was TQM, total quality management. So servant leadership came way later. And I'm going to be completely honest with you. When I very first heard servant leadership, my brain went to the wrong place. And I was cynical and I had to be sold on it because I heard servant leadership and it sounded religious. It didn't sound corporate. I didn't hear the word servant. I heard the word, servant. And I'm like, are we corporate or are we religious? And so it took me a long time to watch an actual servant leader in practice, in action, watch him do the things that we know about it to go, aha, that's what he means. He's not here for his benefit. He's here for our benefit. He's doing things that empower us and drive us because when he's successful, we're successful. Or sorry, when we're successful, he's successful, etc. I was a late convert because I just got that mental picture. It took me a while to unlock the key for it.
It definitely needs some explaining, it especially if it's new for folks too, and I like the way that you do summarize it. I see it as supporting a team and removing roadblocks to create a smooth path for them because you hit the nail on the head. It's not about your own success or achievements. In fact, when you become a leader, it's not about you at all, no matter what kind of style or type of leadership you have to adapt to. Yeah, so I think that's a beautiful summary and something we probably have to continually remind ourselves as leaders. It's not about it's not about us or what we want or our opinion either.
As I say, it's funny you mentioned that if you'll allow it, and again, I'll speak only for me. You find yourself in a situation as a leader where you're like, okay, you have to, and narcissistic is too strong a word. You have to resist congratulating yourself on your achievement because all you've done really is set yourself up for additional scrutiny and additional responsibility. You've not really set yourself up for it. You're not getting parades and crowns and confetti and a cake with your face on it, right? You are getting more work, more responsibility. Men and women rely on you more for their very, their being, right? You'll think Maslow's hierarchy, right? You are now responsible for a larger slice of that hierarchy than you were the day before this whole journey took its next step. That's a very sobering thought if you allow it to take space in your head.
Oh, very humbling too. When you say I
Yeah, yeah.
constantly humbled by that, I think you're right to bring out the hierarchy of needs and understanding what people's needs are. There's also I forget who's credited for the hygiene theory, and understanding the environment and creating that environment is also important too, to have a place that's conducive for your team to succeed and for healthy growth. I was talking to somebody recently and they made the point that you can have growth, but that growth might be a negative kind of growth, could be cancer as a growth, to use paraphrase their words, and as
Yeah.
is, a healthy kind of positive growth where people are learning and collaborating. And you summarize that very well and beautifully, and I think it's good for us to remember that. Now, that leads into my next question. It can be lonely at the top, as they say. So, how do you as a leader support yourself? Where do you go for your own kind of encouragement and sanity, mental health, all the above?
Oh man, there are probably about three questions in that question, and I think you're aware of that experientially and also as an interviewer. If I say to you it's tough, that sounds repetitive. So the action-based answer is don't do what I did originally way back when at the beginning of my official leadership career, where I tried to be their buddy. You cannot, at that point, once you've been asked and appointed a leader, whether you're a good one or a bad one, you are now removed to some extent or the other from from your cadre, from your team that you were up to the neck with just again the day before. And that shift, you almost have to be mindful of that shift that very next day, because I think you have to have that professional detachment. Because if you maintain that buddy relationship, it's like being a parent wanting to be your child's best friend. You can't always. Sometimes you have to say no. Sometimes you have to be the heavy. That one is really tough because you know that with that role brings loneliness, and you don't want to be lonely. You can see it right down the street. And you're like, oh no, I don't want to be alone. Yeah, that's part of the game. That's part of the job. Okay, so internalize that and get comfortable with it. And then, like you said, what do you do about it? Okay, and that's you find men and women like yourself who are on that journey or are well down the path, and they're learning how to refine or to train or to teach or to mentor. And that's what you do. You find your joy in your community in a different way. Think about it this way: you're in a different set of you're in a different cadre. You're in a different set of people now. Yes, you are responsible. You're leading these folks, but you don't get your care and feeding from them as much as they do from you. You have to find that fertilizer in groups like this, new fields, while staying planted. Horrible pun. Staying planted in the field you're being asked to lead. That's the very long-winded answer for how I do it. And sometimes it's still lonely. Let's be honest.
Yeah, but you're very right. It's building that new community for yourself and being able to then collaborate there. Great points. I love that. When it comes to, going back to building teams, you might be given a new team, and it sounds like you had a lot of experience with giving new teams to manage and to lead at different levels and capacities. And then you might have a seasoned team that you're leading as well, or a mixed team. How do you make sure that every voice is heard and that everybody has an opportunity to shine and give their insight and expertise?
I'm really super glad you asked that one, and it's going to sound like a canned answer, but I look for the ability to share this answer every time I can, and it comes down to, and again, stop me at any point if you disagree. You have a certain amount of political capital in your bank at any given time as a leader, right? It's a penny, a nickel, a dime, a quarter, whatever it is. You've got influence. If I'm in a meeting, let's say, or I'm in a situation, I think you saw it that night when we were in the training together. I look for the opportunity actively for someone who they either look like they're uncomfortable sharing for whatever reason, or I've seen some other person jump in front of them, shut them down, cut in line, if you will, speak over them, you name it. I'm always looking at that little radar scan. I'm always looking for someone to say, hey, you know what? Hold on a second. I believe Rebecca's got some experience here, or she's got a point, or she's got XYZ. And I will ask Rebecca, I'll ask you if you would be willing to share that point in this meeting, in this call, whatever the case may be. Let's say we're putting together a QBR, a quarterly business review for an executive. uh, I am going to go find that person or those people who don't normally get their voice in that artifact and bring them to the table and say, would you like to contribute to this artifact that's going to the SVP next Wednesday? Right? Actively find those people who need that extra boost and can benefit from what I think of as your influence, right? Patrick Stewart, our good friend Patrick Stewart from Star Trek, right? Patrick Stewart said, look, I'm famous. He goes, that's great. But all I get from that is I get the ability to use my podium and my voice and my stardom to shine light on a problem or to shine light on people who would otherwise be forgotten. I try to use what little bit of political capital I have at any given moment to bring others to the table, especially if I may be so bold, especially women. We're in 2024, I believe. Still today in 2024, in technology and manufacturing and business, women are still fighting for just a seat at the table at the same level in whatever reason. And so I don't mean to play favorites, but I'm like, let's get that unheard woman's opinion in the mix. Let's get that unheard person of any sort, right? I look for the person who needs a boost, the underdog, whatever you want to call it.
I love that. And what a great reminder for all of us, too, that we have the influence. So we need to use it to lift others up, to look to the groups that are either underserved or maybe overlooked with their voices, and speaks to, that diversity of thought. Because I think you know this, and if you disagree, let me know. I feel like, as a leader, we have to have those other thoughts because we can't know it all, and we don't know it all, and we won't know it all, and we can't be the only one with the solution to everything either. So you need all those voices in the room.
If you're self-aware at all, you know going in that you couldn't possibly have those answers. You're so far removed from that particular specialization, right? The further we get up the leadership chain, the looser we are to the knowledge that we once had. And we are now either more broadly focused or we're very specialized in leadership, whatever the particular role is. You have to leverage all those men and women where you were given responsibility for. You have to leverage them or you will fail or you will not be as successful as you could be, et cetera, right? Going back just one second on the whole thing about underrepresented voices, I'm reminded constantly, especially with my wife and my daughter, both of whom are in the corporate world as well. My daughter, of course, is younger. She's at the beginning of her career. I'm watching her literally in real time struggle with she's not a shy girl at all, believe me, but she still is learning how to get her voice and her experience heard. She can be seen, she's got charisma, but they won't hear what she's saying. They'll just see that she's saying it, if you will. And so I'm helping her hone what I believe are the techniques that she'll be able to use to be heard, right? Not just seeing, talking, right? And my wife sits at the director level in a startup tech company. And even in a position she's in, she has a hard time on occasion being heard because of the things we talked about. And I'm like, they are my object lessons and they are my inspiration every time I mention, like I did to you, where I'm going to actively broaden the scope for people, period, and using those two women in my life as my inspiration.
I love that. What a great mission. And they're so lucky to have you in their
Yeah.
corner, in all corners, to support you and everyone alike. Sometimes we can kind of close the door and silo ourselves in as
Yeah.
leaders, managers, maybe even teams too. So, how do you break through some of those barriers and make sure that not just the leadership team is open to new ideas and feedback, but that all teams are functioning well, cross functioning well together for a more holistic, if you will, experience?
So that's a tough one in the sense that it comes down to making opportunities available to your team to try new things. um, telling them that, hey, this is a piece of training you can have, or this is an experience, or this is a shadow that I've heard about. Would you like to go shadow Steve on the marketing team, for example? Would you like to learn more about how to write a SKU? Right, I can get you in, and you can go learn how to do SKUs with the team that builds the SKUs or whatever. That's one thing. You at that point you leave that gift on the table, and your team will take the gift or they won't, right? And that's one thing you do. The other thing that I do that is successful from time to time is you say, look, we're on starting next Thursday, we're going to switch portfolios. Not completely, not officially, not where people fail, but let's switch portfolios. I'd like for you to take her portfolio, you take his, and let's go learn to how to work with those men and women, those stakeholders in her portfolio, or those stakeholders in his portfolio, right? Learn the differences between your two products. Yeah, they overlap, they've got this certain VIN, but they are different animals. Let's go become cross-functional inside our team by learning each other's gigs, if you will. And again, I didn't invent either of these, of course, as you know. But those are two things that others before us have done that I do with varying levels of success, because you get resistance, or you get inertia, or you get I don't have time, or I don't wanna, or whatever there's one, or think of the old classic bell curve, which has its own problems, right? But there'll be that 10 or 20% who will just run at the chance and go crazy before we even finish with the sentence. They're already down the street doing that thing you offered. And you and I are those people. I know we are. Uh, there'll be that 40% that doesn't matter if you grab them by the lip and you take them to it, they're not going to do it. It's resistant, blah, blah, blah. Or it's that meaty middle. What is it? How much do I have left? 50%. It's that 50% where you can have some fun juggling the dials a bit, right?
That's a great way of looking at it. You mentioned change and resistance, and I don't think anyone really likes change. I never met anyone that's like, "Yay, I love change.
You
Let's
ain't
always
changed.
change. Yay,
No,
yay." Um,
no, no.
there's perhaps some of us. I would assume you you and myself included in that are more agile at adapting to change and embracing it, but there's always going to be a little bit of resistance or a lot in different areas and from different people. So, when
Yeah.
you are working with a team, how do you best guide them through that and prepare them for it?
Sticks, bats, bricks. No, no. Oh, what I well, I tell you, it's funny, but what I tease. But what I will do, though, honestly, is that's when they see my so-called soft underbelly, and I'll say it's like, hey, look, guys, team, I don't like this change. Let's say it's an org change, for example. I don't like this org change any more than you do. I have no say in the org change, and here's what we're going to do to adjust to this change, right? Let's work together on a plan. Let's work together on getting comfortable. Let's ask some smart questions of the people in this new org that we found ourselves in, if it's that kind of change. If it's a change where you need that person to step up and have her take a new responsibility because you've lost a resource or whatever, uh, demonstrate for her or him, hey, you've been there. And when I was there, I was scared. I was confused. I didn't think I could do it. Why are you making me do this? I'm happy in my little bubble. Uh, Explain to them that you were there once, and how you got over it, right? Lead them to this new place where you need them to be by demonstrating how to get there. This is going to sound terrible, but as a leader, one of the things I do, is I will lead them. This is a horrible metaphor, not even a hockey player, but I will lead them to where I need the puck to be. Right. So I am going to look forward in the future and say, look, if I manifest this picture of this person succeeding, let me tell her how I see that. Let me praise her ahead of time and build up that confidence that she can take that step with. Right. It's not lying. It's nothing of that nature. Don't BS people. Find that inspiration lever for her and pull it now. Pull it early, right? Get her excited about this journey so she's not focused on the change part. She's focused on the, ooh, this is going to be really cool when we're done, right?
Yeah. You're focused on the transformation versus the tough part of having to go through that, and what does the butterfly look like versus the caterpillar's struggle. Yeah.
Much better metaphor than I had.
But you
Yeah.
you explain it so well, and I think that's really great because, it's our job as leaders to paint the reality. Somebody told me that not too long ago. And I love that, and I've held on to that because you need to understand the terrain that you're traveling on, or that you don't know what the terrain is gonna be like. All planners are liars, and we certainly know that in agile that you can plan as much as you want, but it's that mental model that the map is not the territory, and we live in a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. And because of that, all we can do as leaders is be transparent, provide that context, and let people know that we have their back and that this is what we can work towards. If I'm summarizing or expanding on what you're saying, we can help them see the transformation, what's possible, whether we know, what's going to happen or not. So I think that's really great reminder. Yeah. What are your additional thoughts on that?
Well, you nailed it, I think, absolutely perfectly. And I wrote down that math is not the territory. That encapsulates so many things, cross section, right? That I'm gonna be thinking and stealing the heck out of that. Don't worry.
Well,
Talking with you
yeah,
more
and
about that later.
don't give me credit because math is not the territory. I forget who came up with that, but it is many smarter, wiser people than I have identified that, but it's so true, right? That you can look at a Google map all you want, but when you actually get in the car and start driving, it looks different. The road is different. There's a pothole this time or an accident. Yeah.
Other facet I was going to ask you, I was going to turn the camera around, if you will, metaphorically, and ask you the question about, you said something to the effect of, "Hey, no one likes change." I'm taken back to that book, "Who Moved My Cheese," or from that was 2007, I think, that "Who Moved My Cheese" book. Tell me about you, how you deal with change. Do you have like a certain amount of change you're comfortable making, and once those coins are spent, you're just, tell me about how you deal with change, personal slash professional. I'd love to hear your take on that in reverse.
Yeah, oh, yeah, I think, well, I appreciate that. In the same way that you came from the military, I came from the theater, and very two different worlds, right? Very different. And in theater, you constantly have to evolve and change, and you're constantly getting feedback, especially as an actor. I'm coming from actor, director, but I've had and held many, many different roles in theater, but sort of on stage and, backstage and supporting. And so you have to be able to receive feedback and be able to change on a dime and embrace that. So I attribute a lot of my agility to actually being on stage where an actor says the wrong line to you, or I've said the wrong line to an actor, and you all have to improvise. And so, just in taking improv classes or working in comedy and understanding how can I lend my additional creativity, my whatever intelligence I have in the moment that I can lend to serve in theater, the play, the story, my fellow players, actors, um, to work towards that common story good, if you will. And so that's where I learned a lot of it and how to be resourceful at the same time. Sometimes I think change comes from those external conditions that force us into some constraints. And that's where we have the ability to be the most creative. So when it comes to change, personally, I might take a moment to breathe and think, okay, here we go again, right? If it's something that requires, in business, in my current role, it might require some systems thinking and understanding that what is the event that's occurring, how does this affect other avenues and other people, and ultimately, as a leader, I think you do have to think through, well, how is this going to affect everybody else? You can take your moment as a leader to feel and to work through and process the change that needs to occur. But I think you already said it, Kale. It comes down to what's the outcome, what's the transformation that we're envisioning. And so if you can know what the objective is that you're aiming for, or if you have an inkling of it, because we still don't always sometimes know what that is, and if you have an understanding of the scope, the scale of the work, or the deliverable that needs to happen, then you can go to your people and you can tell them, it goes back to painting the reality. This is where we're at. This is what I know. This is what I don't know. Give me feedback. What are your fears and concerns? Share with me, because you have to create that psychological safety too, right? And they will know if you're afraid and you're not telling them. So I think it's better to be vulnerable enough. I don't think you have to, let everything show. I don't think you have to all of your fears show, but I think you can be vulnerable enough to share with them that, hey, I'm not sure what this is going to be, but we're on this road together. I'm here to support you. The best way I can support you is for you to tell me what you need, come to me early and often before things build up so that we can work together. Because I think you've also said this too, Kale, in so many ways. We don't know the specialty fully of all of our team members, or we might not have their skill sets, and that's why we need them. But if we approach them with the understanding that I might not ever have done your job or be able to do your job half as well as you do, but I am willing to roll up my sleeves and work alongside of you and be on the ground working with you, that's how you will help people navigate through those times of uncertainty. And I think they will feel better for it, no matter how much we all hate change or you get that resistance. And you can't control people, but you can control how you approach it and your attitude. And I think that's half the battle.
I'd say even 75%. There's one thing that I think you and I both said obliquely, and that is there's not going to be a day like it's not all going to come together next Tuesday, right? This is a constant journey, and you are constantly juggling and shuffling both your own needs at that that Maslow type approach. You're juggling those every day. You have to share that vulnerability only to the point where it doesn't impact your ability to lead, right? And that goes back to that detachment. You can't be too vulnerable because then they're like, oh well, oh we're gonna, or you can't let them understand. You can't let them confuse vulnerability with I'm not going to lead us through this. There's a difference, right? Uh, Chew through all that mental gristle yourself with that stoic leader face on, with that look that says, I got this, right? Theater, it is, how much of that is theater, to your point earlier, you know? Uh, w- yeah. Well, one of the things I think that you touched on that I'd like to echo or amplify as I heard it was, you talked about your background in theater, what I might call a non-allied discipline, and how you've taken that non-allied discipline and you've applied the techniques and the learnings to something else entirely. I'm reminded of, it was in like the 80s or so, we would hear about the football players who would go take ballet because it would help them with their grace and their athleticism and their ability to leap or whatever the case may have been. And you see these big jock guys like, I'm not taking ballet. And they saw the guy come back from the off season and he's leaping 5 inches higher. He's whatever. And they're like, oh, huh, how did you do that? And he's like, well, I did that with ballet, for example. And so as a leader or anybody else in our worlds, that ability to synthesize those other things that you bring from your different side of your life, I think are key. And that's as a person, as a leader, as a doer, whatever the case may be. I wanted to echo and amplify what you said there. You've got to constantly pull in new material as that recipe that you were alluding to. Yeah.
I love that. I did not know there was a name for it or a term for it, so I thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think you're right. This is maybe an unpopular opinion, but I don't always think of it a work-life balance, but I think of an ebb and a flow to life, and that goes back to the understanding that change is always constant, and sometimes you need to pull on more personal life or your business life, but all of it is life, and how you show up in one place is how hopefully you're showing up in another. And that's where that non-ally can actually be allied. You can have that kind of unity, if you will, and if I'm understanding it correctly.
Hmm. Yeah, you nailed it. And whether that's a person, or that's a tool or technique, that non-allied, or that adjacent thing that you're doing, that on first blush doesn't look related or doesn't look like you could draw a connection from it, you'd be surprised. What is it? Mind mapping. I think in my mind, I've got that sort of mind mapping image in my head. It's like that. You've got this ball of thing over here, and you've got this ball of thing over here, but they've got joints, they've got tendrils, they've got connections that are not immediately apparent. And you bring those connections together in your mind, if you will. You know,
Definitely. Just as you have with your military background and all the wonderful teams and industries you've worked in too. I'm curious, we talk a lot about teams. Well, we talked a lot about leaders and working with teams as a leader. What makes a great team? What are some attributes that you would give to a really solid, healthy, growing team?
the first word that pops into my mind is selflessness. The opposite of the opposite of, it's the exact thing you would think, but to me, selflessness is the first thing. Without, that the team is a team only if the horrible use of a verb that doesn't exist, just if they cohese. If they are if they come together. uh we in the corporate world make up words all the time, right? They're just a group of men and women who sit together physically or virtually, if they are not to one degree or the other selfless, right? With their time, with their knowledge, with their patience, with whatever it is that you need at that time to get your job done, to finish that task. You just need a boost. You need someone to go get a cup of coffee with you, to listen to you moan a moment, right? Whatever the case may be. Without that selflessness, you don't have a team. And to me, that's the foundational element, and everything else builds from there. And that selflessness will manifest itself, honestly, with, again, hopefully it's not transactional. You don't have a bunch of little Machiavelli sitting in their cube going, I'm going to do him a favor today, and I'm keeping a score. And next Tuesday, when I'm up against it, I'm going to ask Cale to pay me back. That's not the thing, right? That's not teamwork. That's prison. I don't know what right? But
Yeah, that would be
selflessness is the
slavery.
answer.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So
I
I'd love your take on what makes a team. I'd say selflessness again. Yeah.
Well, I agree. I'm actually laughing because I just had a conversation with a team member who is, on that leadership track. And I said, don't ever ask your team for favors because
Yeah.
they're not working for you. We're all here for common goals and objectives. And as soon as you ask someone
Yeah.
for a favor, then they think that you owe them,
Oh yeah.
right? Yeah.
Make, strong word. Inspire them, because make sounds bad. Inspire
Yeah.
them to do the thing that you need done. That's the essence of leadership. Don't make it where you have to tell them to do it. Don't, and there are times when you have to be the boss, but that's, if we've all read the same books. If you do that, if you have to do that too much, you've already failed. If you do it too much, you are going to fail. But again, way back when, you've begun to inspire them at some point, right? And there's negative. Now I'll
Yeah.
laugh. I'll tell you a story later if you want it. There's negative inspiration as well, right?
Yeah.
But you've hopefully and positively inspired them, so that it's not a favor, it's just what they do because they want to do this for you, because there's an upside, because there's a reason, because you lead them, you know. Yeah.
Yeah. What is the negative? I am curious.
Negative inspiration. So this goes back to one of my most recent bosses. I adore the guy. There are so many things about him that I model. He would end our staff meetings every day. He goes, I need you to do me a favor. It's favor, but it was his joke. He'd say, team, do me a favor. He said, if I've inspired you today, please let me know. And he goes, and there is such thing as, if I've negatively inspired you, I want to know that too. You know. And he never did define what negative inspiration was. Okay. So every so often, I mean, I'm his chief of staff, right? So every so often, I'd say, hey, Victor, you know what, man, you really brought the negative inspiration today. Way to go. You know, you know. or you negatively inspired me today, or whatever. So the idea, of course, is we know what negative inspiration can be, right? It can be he messed up, he didn't demonstrate, and I'm not using this particular person, but negative inspiration could be they did not demonstrate leadership, and you're like, oh man, that's ooh, yeah, he gave you the it hacked you off, or whatever the case may be. That's inspiration, because now you're inspired to be mad, you're inspired to ignore them, you're inspired to show them how you're going to do it better, whatever. That's, to me, that's negative inspiration, right? It's like yeah, it's like the rat getting shocked when he's trying to eat the cheese, so
That's a
yeah,
great story.
negative inspiration. Nah,
You have to
nah.
also define it for your people so they have that,
Yeah,
point of reference.
and he
Yeah.
never did, so I had fun with it, but no, yeah, but yeah,
That's great. Well,
yeah.
you mentioned something too, and that is part of the idea behind this podcast, that we can learn from bad bosses. Not saying your boss was a bad boss, but we can learn from those
Mm-mm.
negative situations or those unclear situations where we feel that ick, or
Yeah,
it turns us away from their influence. And in
yeah,
some
and that's it
cases,
right there.
yeah, and it puts us in a position where we're actually seeking a new or a different work environment, and that's where we are hopefully learning the lesson before we make it ourselves, um, and you're able to see what not to do, as well
Yep.
as have the wonderful leaders in our lives who have inspired us in what to do and how to lead. And, we're still going to make those mistakes. It's always going to be a journey. And hopefully, we have that self awareness, which you've been talking about too. So, you know, I think self-awareness is something I've certainly gotten from theater. You have to have a self-awareness and a self-forgetfulness at the same time. You have to be
Mm-hmm.
aware of yourself in the space, and then you have to forget that it's
You.
so that you can serve the audience. And in the same way as a leader, you have to have that self-awareness and then that selflessness that you also talked about. So for anyone who is, I think you have to have the self-awareness to then work on self-awareness. Otherwise, you don't know you need it. Maybe that's meta, but how do you approach that as someone on a leadership journey? If you were talking to someone who's just starting their journey as a leader, how do you develop that for yourself?
Mm. It's so funny you mentioned that, and it's different people have different ways of doing it, but I've always had an inner monologue. Sometimes it escapes from my mouth and mumbles, and people can hear it, but there's always an inner monologue. And I that self awareness is something. It's a blessing and a curse. I've been self aware for a really long time, and so that practice just comes from doing and saying, "Cale, you stupid idiot," or "Hey, you know what? Let's try this." And I'm having this conversation in my head with myself all the time, and I'm veering, and I'm checking, and I'm envisioning, and I'm thinking, and I'm like, oh, yeah. So the answer is, again, it goes back to what we said for the last several minutes: practice, repetition, right? Testing, finding out what works for you, whether it's in your head or in actuality. Um, I tell all those young leaders, just go do it. And this is not my saying either, to your point earlier. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. You are not going to be a perfect leader ever. I'm not. I never will be. I'm going to go to my grave a failed human being on so many levels. But I want to leave some little positive inspiration for someone to grab onto and keep going. Don't get hung up on your mistakes. You are not going to be successful tomorrow. It's going to take time. So just go do it, right? Learn, put on the band-aid and get back up and go do it some more. Because now you're demonstrating resilience, you're demonstrating flexibility, you're demonstrating all those skills that inspire teams in a positive way. You're demonstrating them by just staying with it. So I'll say the first answer is go do it. Just go do it, right? Find a mentor or two or three or 10 who little pieces of what they do you can take and you can synthesize, again, that great word, synthesize, into how you do it, right? So practice, so it's just do it, synthesize, learn, rather rinse, repeat until you think you're going to die, and then just keep doing it anyway, right? Maybe you've got a different method, but oh yeah, and constantly take stock to your point about self-awareness, right? Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's that I love that, and I love your point about perfection. It's not attainable. I had a wonderful leader and mentor who told me a long time ago, I've held on to this, practice makes progress. And you just reminded me of that. You're very wise and insightful advice because we have to continually practice if we want to make progress, but we're never going to be perfect. And that is both humbling to me and hopeful, inspiring, hopefully encouraging as well for others that you don't have to be perfect. We have to show up as our best selves and do the work. And you've reminded us of that. So thank you for that.
And gosh, you're welcome. And I think, and stop me again if you disagree. Each day there are certain elements of your leadership that are going to be relevant and some that aren't. And so if I think of the kind of leader I am with three hats, I've got that leader of who is the coach, the mentor, the shaper, the builder. Okay, I've got the mentor. I'm sorry, I've got the leader who is the demonstrator, who he just goes and does it and shows them it can be done, shows them how it can be done. And then there's the other one who you use less often if you can help it, is the accountability one, right? You hold them accountable. And if you've done your job correctly in those other two, this guy is not scary, but he's very black and white. He's very binary. He's very, we have to do this. I don't like it. You don't like it. Doesn't matter. This is the rule. This is the law. This is the whatever. What can I do? I can't use this figure. What can I do to make sure that you're successful in achieving this goal? What's blocking you from doing what you need to do? Right. Uh, so that accountability comes with, again, with the leadership recognition of, do I need to do something to set you up for success, or are you just not getting it done? What's the what's the rub here, right? Those three people, you're constantly, to my mind, you're constantly shuffling those hats by the moment as a leader. And it may be you're using one hat for her, another hat for him, right? In the moment. And you're shuffling constantly. That's the other element of leadership, is like I said way earlier, flexibility, adaptability, agility, the theme here. Just be willing to constantly shift gears depending on the situation, right?
I love it. Absolutely agree. Kale, you are a wealth fountain of wisdom and insight and great practical advice too. I feel like there's a lot of great wisdom out in the world that we can enjoy and imbibe from, but the if the practical is missing, then it's hard to put it into practice. And you've done that for us. So thank you so much for all of the above. How can people find you, connect with you, work with you? Where would you like people to find you best?
Oh, well, thank you. I'm trying to build a presence on LinkedIn that's not just about job and this and that. And so look for me on LinkedIn, Cale Corbett, Corbett. Outlook, Cale.Corbett at outlook.com, because they can't be the same. It's funny you mentioned that. One of what I'm looking at also too, I'm trying to see that you talked about the practical advice and the ability to take things that are portable. I'm looking for the right vehicle to be able to encapsulate that and bring that to more people. I haven't quite found that vehicle yet, but if there's someone who's watching or listening and they've got ideas or they've got that vehicle they'd like me to bring this element to, I'd love to talk with that person about how we could bring these to more folks. So
I love that. So
at
if
LinkedIn is a very good way to start with me if they like.
that's great. So we will definitely put your information all below in the captions, whatever platform people are listening on, so they can reach out to you and help collaborate. Because I think that's a wonderful mission, and I'm excited for what you have in store. So thank you so much, Cale, for sharing. Thank you to our listeners on the Bad Bosses Great Leaders podcast. We'll see you next time.